The member for Clark.
And I thank the Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, our country is slowly flipping from a country of home owners to a country of renters. And that's a terribly sad thing to observe and to live through. You know, you've only got to go back maybe 2, maybe 3 decades. And the normal course of events was someone would, normal sort of person, regular Joe, he'd get a job, or she would get a job, would work hard, save up a house deposit, and could afford to buy a cottage, a modest cottage, for the family to grow up in. They might upgrade it and upsell to something grander, a couple of decades later when they can afford it. Now, I'm not wanting it to go back to the white picket fence of John Howard, but I am wanting to go back to a day when a regular person had it within their capacity that they would own their own home. But at some point during that last 2 or 3 decades, especially in the last half a dozen years or so, housing stopped becoming a fundamental human right in this country, and it became an investment product. It was in some ways no better or worse than a parcel of shares or whatever someone might invest in, maybe cryptocurrency these days. So no longer was a home a fundamental human right and something that regular people could aspire to and achieve. It became an investment product for those who could afford to try and make a buck. Now, I don't criticise the people who have made a buck, and I've traded a few houses myself over the years. What I am criticising, though, is the succession of governments over decades that have quite deliberately put in place the policy settings to turn homes into investments and to take away that fundamental human right. Of course, negative gearing. And in fact, I think the thing that made negative gearing worse, it wasn't just the introduction of negative gearing, it was the change that allowed property owners to deduct property costs against their gross income, including their personal salary. That change from when you could only deduct against the costs of the property, I think that was a very significant and a very detrimental change in turning property from a human right into an investment. And of course, capital gains tax. Of course you should pay some sort of capital gains tax when you have a substantial capital gain. But the decision to halve the capital gains tax after 12 months, look, it might have been well-intentioned, but I'm hard-pressed to find one decent economist in this country who thinks the halving of the capital gains tax, that so-called discount, I can't find one good economist in the country who thinks that's a good idea. So you can see where I'm going with this, Deputy Speaker. I obviously support, and in fact I applaud the government for deciding to do something around the tax arrangements regarding residential property. And I will support the bill. And I will do it with honesty, because I went to the last election campaigning for tax reform of residential property. So I feel quite pure about this. I don't feel that I'm letting my community down by supporting this bill. But it does bring me to the criticism by the opposition and others of the government that they went to the election promising not to do this. Well, you know what, to some degree I'll associate myself with the opposition's criticism here, because this is one of the biggest tax reforms that I can think of, certainly in my adult lifetime, and it would be proper process for something this big to have been taken to the election. So although I will support it, and I won't feel guilty about doing that because I campaign on this on such a reform, I would say to the government, you should have taken it to the election. And I'd say to the opposition, when you have big reforms in future, take it to the election. Because whether it be Tony Abbott reneging on his promises before and after the 2004 election, or the current government reneging on its promises before last year's election, all it does is feed that cynicism of the political class in the community. You know, it's no wonder emerging parties are enjoying record popularity, because the people, the old political class is letting the community down, and the community is wanting to to ventilate that dissatisfaction, that displeasure. So it feeds into that. Back to a positive, though, for a moment, Deputy Speaker. I think the government, and by the way, if you think I'm a bit all over the place, it's because I think this bill's a bit all over the place. It's got some really good aspects and it's got some really lamentable aspects. I do think that the idea of having an equivalency between the tax on income earned from investments with a similar amount of income earned from wages, I think trying to achieve some sort of equivalency is a good idea as a matter of principle. And it is achieved to some degree in as far as in this bill, the minimum capital gains tax will be 30% instead of the old 25%. I would say, though, that that increase of 5%, particularly when it's offset against the effects of inflation, so that people who are paying capital gains tax after 12 months actually won't be paying probably that much different. They might even be paying a little bit less with this reform. And I think the scare campaign around this capital gains tax minimum 30% is quite that's quite dishonest. And it's coming from people who are accusing the government of dishonesty, but the scare campaign is equally dishonest. But of course, the devil is always in the detail, Deputy Speaker. And when I look at this minimum 30%, I think, well, what happens to someone who is living off the income of capital gains and they are getting less than about $200,000 capital gain from that investment? Well, if that was just taxed as a normal income, they would be paying markedly less than 30% tax. So, in other words, and this will be even more pronounced when we debate the next bill, which goes to the detail of trusts. The problem with the settings at minimum 30% is anyone who's getting an income from investments or a disbursement from a trust of less than about, I think it's about $192,000 or $195,000, they will actually be paying more tax than they were before. And I think that's very unfair. In fact, I'll quickly jump to that point of trusts. You know, they say that an age pensioner is exempt, will be exempt of 30% tax on the disbursement from a trust in retirement. Well, they'll only be exempt, of course, Deputy Speaker, if they're receiving at least $1 of income support payment from Services Australia through the age pension. But of course, you don't get any age pension for a couple for about $100,000. Yeah, rough figures. Rough figures. So what happens to a couple who is living off their investments and getting somewhere between $100,000 income and $200,000 income? They will be paying 30% tax on the disbursement from the trust, or looping back to just simply a capital gain. They'll be paying at least 30% tax on the income from that capital gain. And that is actually markedly more than if they were simply paying, for example, personal income tax. So the settings on this aren't right. And one of the reasons the settings aren't right is, you know, it was never socialised. There was never a public consultation. There was never an exposure draft. There was never a detailed, or will be a detailed, parliamentary inquiry into these changes. There will never be the opportunity for the government to adjust the exposure draft and to get it just right. I mean, this sort of change, you don't just suddenly drop it on us and say, there you go, and then when you come under media pressure or political pressure, you say, oh, don't worry about the lack of detail or the fact that the settings, like I described, between 100 and 200,000. Don't you worry about that. Sounds like Joe Biolki-Peterson. Don't you worry about that. As sure as night follows day, we will consult after this becomes law, and we will change it in your favour. Well, excuse me, Deputy Speaker, no wonder people are sceptical that that will be done right. Particularly with these reforms, that's giving increasing pressure to the minister to make adjustments and to bring down regulations or whatever. Now, we should do this properly. We should have proper process. The proper process, by the way, starts with making it an election promise, and then once you're elected, saying, OK, we're going to go through this, we're going to have an effective consultation process with the community, with industry groups, with other peak bodies. We're going to talk to everyone from from people in the bush on their property right through to the captains of industry in the major capital cities. And we're going to come up with a reform that works and is fair. And then they might have created that exposure draft, circulated that. What do you think? More consultations, carefully drafted a bill, and then we would have come to the parliament knowing exactly what we were voting for. But I've been talking to quite a few backbenchers this week in the government, the opposition, the crossbench, and I've been asking questions of them. They've been asking questions of me. And I tell you what, Deputy Speaker, I've lost count of the number of times my colleagues have said, "No, I don't know about that," or "I'm not sure about that, don't know what that means." We pulled out the bill today in my office and we tried to make sense of one particular point of detail. I think the three of us, our 6 eyeballs all glazed over, trying to make sense of it. Not the way to do big reform, Deputy Speaker. I did mention the subsequent bill, Deputy Speaker, on trusts. I will warn the government now that although I will support this bill, because I went to the election, in fact I've been to a series of elections in series, campaigning for tax reform for at least residential property. So I will honour my promise to my community and I will support this bill. But I'll warn the government I'm not going to extend the same support as it stands to the next bill, which will go into the detail of trusts. I mean, that is such a complex area where you just can't have one size fits all. It just doesn't work. I mean, it comes from a place of demonising that anyone who's got a trust is a rich. I can't it'd be unparliamentary, but you know where I'm going with this, Deputy Speaker. Is a rich person who's just dodging tax, and that's not the case. I had a family trust when I had a small business in a previous life. It was the most effective structure for me to run my company. I wasn't dodging tax. I mean, heavens! I think the little business my wife and I had, we were lucky to take home $80,000 a year. Nothing was being dodged. It was just a sensible structure for our little business. And I tell you what jumps out at me as the most ridiculous aspect of the trust proposals is that we would put a 30% tax on the disbursements from testamentary trusts. I mean, that's an appalling proposition by the government. And I probably don't need to go into any detail here and detain the House Deputy Speaker, because we've heard so many examples in the last week or so about all of the good and sensible reasons people need to have such trusts to protect their estate, particularly if their beneficiary might be a child with disability, a child gambling addiction, a child who you are concerned might fall into a relationship with a scoundrel and end up fleecing them. There's countless reasons why testamentary trusts are a sensible and good idea to protect your family. I'm in a blended family myself. Claire and I, we love each other, and I don't doubt that we'll always do the right thing by each other. But heavens, there's a lot of blended families where, one partner or the other must be wondering, if I drop off the perch, what happens in 10 or 20 years' time when my surviving spouse meets that scoundrel who fleeces her or fleeces him? So that's an example of where the next bill, I think, is going to run into a real brick wall. And it might be amended adequately that I can support it, but as I stand here now, I certainly won't. And I look forward to joining into the debate about that. Deputy Speaker, in closing, can I just say I welcome changes to make housing more affordable. Hobart, a beautiful little town, I've never seen homeless like it. I've met people holding down steady, reasonably well-paid jobs, living in their car. I mean, this is just bizarre. We're one of the richest countries in the world. I think we're the 14th biggest economy in the world. But we've allowed our housing arrangements to devolve to the point where we have all these homeless people couch surfing, people paying on the Gold Coast. I was up there not that long ago helping my daughter get into some accommodation. She's at uni. She and her friend are paying $800 a week for a modest 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms in a reasonable location. It shouldn't be this way, Deputy Speaker, so I do support this bill and I will support future reform to make housing available and affordable.